If your organization is ready to enhance cyber resilience, we have important insights for you. The 2024 Level Blue Futures Report sheds light on how rapid computing changes affect IT visibility. Our research reveals that while IT leaders see positive outcomes, 85% acknowledge increased risk. In this report, we identify the barriers to cyber resilience, the challenges impacting cybersecurity, and the business contexts that reveal operational issues. You'll also discover what's on the horizon and 5 essential steps for prioritizing cyber resilience. Get your complimentary copy of this crucial research today. Visit securityweekly.com/level blue. Cybersecurity simplified. In 2024, the future of identity, security, and digital transformation converges at Octane, hosted by Okta. On October 15th through 17th, join the brightest minds in tech and business in Las Vegas or online as they explore groundbreaking innovations and unveil the latest Okta solutions to keep your organization secure, connected, and ahead of the curve. Whether you're a developer, an IT or security leader, or visionary, Octane is your gateway to transforming tomorrow, today. Security Weekly listeners need only pay $100 for a full conference pass to Octane, and you can do so by using the discount code OKTNSC24 at securityweekly.com/Octane2024. Stream the event live on okta.com/Octane. Welcome back to Enterprise Security Weekly. Now for the Enterprise Security Weekly news. We have Miss Katie Teitler-Santullo with us. How are you doing, Katie?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm not used to introducing you at the news segment.
I know, I
So,
know. It's been a busy week, so I had to take some time back to do the ever-pressing task of updating some stuff for my sales team, and that's what I've been doing all morning.
nice.
Which I guess it's afternoon now, so all morning and all afternoon, which equates to most of the day.
So this is your break?
This is my break, but after this, I'm done. I'm done
Yeah. Yeah, after
until
this I'm done.
tomorrow
Is
morning.
After this I'm very done. I am getting in the car and driving up to Louisville, Kentucky for Bourbon and Beyond, a big
Oh, that's a good
4-day
thing.
festival. Yeah, unfortunately, I'm
Wow.
missing
Fun.
today, so I won't get to see Beck or Sting, who are both playing today. But
Oh,
yeah, there's something like 90 different acts playing. It's huge.
jealous.
And presumably there will be bourbon there somewhere because it
It
is
is
in the
in the
name.
name.
And it is in Louisville. So, all right. So, you guys didn't hear it because I said it in the intro, but today is Talk Like a Pirate Day, just so you know that. And we also have Mr. Tyler Shields with us. How you doing, Tyler?
Good. I was trying to think of a greeting that I could give you that had R in it, but I couldn't come up with one. So
I,
this is the
I
best you
went.
get.
I threw to you too quickly. Yeah.
Yeah, I was trying. I was gonna say like I don't know, happy. I don't even know. I can't even come up with one with this much time. So guess I'm out of luck.
Yeah. Yeah. That's okay. Um. Yeah. So I kind of changed up how we do the news. It's more coincidence that we don't have any fundings or acquisitions today. I just didn't see any that we either didn't already talk about last week because we did have a lot of like breaking news last week. How many times did I change the notes during the news segment? Like 3 or 4. Yeah. So we kind of got all that done and out of the way. The big the Mastercard one and some of the others. And yeah, so today, it's more high level. We're talking about more strategic, philosophical, infosec related stuff. But we've got some interesting stories, some fun stories. Some whoopsies is one of my favorite new categories here, where companies make people make mistakes here. It's not even just companies here. But yeah, let's dig into it. Oh, I forgot to say today, this is 376. So if you want to check out the notes, you can go to securityweekly.com/ESW376. All right. So we have not one, but two stories from Chris Hughes in here. He really bangs out some interesting articles, and I try not to overuse people's stuff here, but he does have some interesting ones. There have been a lot put out there about maybe, the thing about 3 million open jobs in cybersecurity isn't exactly accurate, at least certainly not for people trying to get into the industry. So this is a very interesting and kind of comprehensive take on what's actually going on there. So he looks at a bunch of the data, talks about what it looks like for different roles, and yeah, just because you get a certain number of hits from, I don't know, Indeed or LinkedIn Jobs doesn't mean that all those roles are going to get hired. And on the other end of it, we're seeing so many layoffs today. I feel like almost every person I knew at Cisco got laid off from Cisco a couple days ago.
Well, 7,500 people was the
Yeah,
last number I heard.
yeah,
So that's just a massive number. I mean, yeah, Chris's report is really cool. I definitely recommend you go check it out. And we've talked about this before on the show, Adrian. There's a lot of nuance to the commentary of X number of jobs or X number of available roles in cybersecurity. There's so much nuance because it's not like, hey, it's and no offense to plumbers, but it's not like it's plumbers where you either plumb or you don't, right? There's like,
mhm,
I'm a engineer, I'm a SRE expert, I'm a AppSec engineer, I'm a CISO. Each of those has its own level of nuances, and there could be times where CISOs have tons of jobs available and times where they have none, and same thing for SOC, and they may not line up, right? And so I just think it's way too generalized to say things like 300 thousand or 3 million or whatever the magic number people threw out of available cybersecurity jobs. It's just way too generic a statement.
And one thing that Chris makes clear in his article that others have as well, and I think the iteration is good, is that sometimes these studies of, how many of you are hiring right now, how many jobs are open at your company, they're not surveying the people who are actually hiring. They're surveying people at the companies who don't have insight into the pipeline for hiring. They're not hiring managers
hmm,
themselves. They might see things on the website or on LinkedIn that may or may not be real job openings or may not be from last year or whatever the case is. But these mid-level managers who aren't involved in hiring, at least according to this and other reports, as Tyler said, we've come across, they do point out that a significant number of the respondents come from people who are in the trenches and not in a position to hire or influence hiring. And that's important too, because you have a different perspective of what needs to be done if you're in a team versus you're the finance person saying, hey, we have budget for X headcount.
yeah. And it's interesting, Tyler, you used plumbers, because even there, that gets nuanced. We had a plumber in the house the other day, and we're asking him to do something. He was like, "Oh, I don't do that. We've got some other guys that do that." But
Yeah, I mean, yeah, even
it's funny.
generic conversation like that can be nuanced, right? So now, when you're throwing numbers around 750,000, 500,000 available cyber roles, he cites another good example here where early career level roles within 48 hours, one particular role that he had some insight into received over 700 applications in 48 hours.
Yeah,
Um, something's off, something doesn't smell right when that's happening.
yeah,
No, it
and
could be
and
bot traffic, it could be anything. And there are also, I think when we're looking at these numbers, we tend to forget that some of these jobs, quote unquote, in security aren't security roles necessarily. Like my role, depending on whom you are, might
marketing.
not be
Yeah,
considered a security role. I do not have hands on keys security practical expertise. I don't. I'm not an engineer. I'm not an architect. I work in the security field. I understand security. I write about security. I talk about security, but it also depends on what perspective you're looking at it from. I work with a lot of content people because we hire writers, and I always have at my previous jobs, who write about security. But you can take somebody from outside security and write about it at a certain level. So again, the nuance is definitely important. Um, And some people will also just throw their resumes out there, which doesn't mean that they're job seeking. Some companies will sometimes
Mm.
throw jobs up on LinkedIn or Indeed or whatever just to see what's out there. They might not be hiring for a role right now, but they're trying to create that pipeline. So there, the idea that, oh, we got 700 resumes. I would also question whether that's true or if that's bot traffic, but getting the right resumes is just as important as getting resumes. And
Well,
it,
and I want to talk about that a bit, because I feel like, unrealistic requirements are put out there. So, like, the hiring managers can argue, look, none of these 700 are, you know, appropriate for the job. None of them meet the requirements. And then on the other side of that, they're saying nobody meets your requirements. Like, and there's a funny image here under requirements on this post, where they say looking to fill an entry level cybersecurity role, PhD preferred.
yeah,
25 years of C++ experience, salary range 28K to 32K. And it's that's clearly a joke, but they could have just as easily grabbed a real uh, job rec out there, and it would look almost as funny.
yeah.
It would look almost as unrealistic and ridiculous. Like, I remember there were a couple times I've uh, thrown my resume in for a role as a favor to someone, because at like a public university, they need a certain number of people to apply to the role for them to be able to fill it. And literally, the role was 50% what they should have been paying for that role. Like a senior security role that's 75K or something like that. With 15 years of experience, they're literally, the only people I can think of going for that is where you get the perk of being able to be a full-time student for free, and you've got career students out there, people who have like 3 master's degrees. That's the only person I can imagine being a good fit for that, because nobody who has 15 years of experience and with senior in the title is going after a 75K role, not even in East Tennessee. So yeah, it's I don't know. The other thing I hear from a lot of the people that I've mentored is a lot of open roles just disappear, just up and vanish. In the middle of the process, they're like, yeah, we decided to close that role, or we're no longer hiring for that role, or we got reorged, or we got acquired, and all roles got frozen. So some, and I think it's probably a hefty chunk of all these open roles we're looking at will never follow through
Such is the
and end up
life
in a
of being a
hire.
cost center. Such is the life of being a cost center as opposed to a revenue driving center of the business, right? Like, it's pretty easy to justify a revenue driving center of the business. We hire someone, we pay them 100,000, they generate 200, 250, 300,000 in revenue, and it's okay, that makes sense. It's easy to, when things are going sideways, or the economy's tough, or people or companies struggling to meet goals and grow, you look at the team, you're like, who's not providing revenue, right? And security is a cost center. So security, like marketing, is some of the first ones that tend to get hit. Is how far can we take this down to the bone without killing ourselves, right? Without putting too much risk into the business, but how tight can we really take this thing? And I think oftentimes, to your point, Adrian, they might think they're hiring and literally just find a cut comes out of nowhere, right? Or a reorg
Yeah.
comes for that reason out of nowhere. And I think those two things play together.
Well, there's
And I
another
wonder if,
essay in here that ties into it, the cybersecurity delusion problem. And
yeah,
and I
take us
think
take us
these
there, Katie.
I think that plays really nicely with this. So again, not necessarily a brand new topic.
Same
Um,
author, by the way.
Same author, yes, same author, good report, but it talks about how cybersecurity really isn't stepping up to understand its role in the business. We've been talking about it for years. Cybersecurity has to serve the business, and it hasn't matured to a point where others in the business see cybersecurity as the massive risk that cybersecurity professionals do. Now, I don't think this is hugely uncommon from industry to industry. right? I don't think that people who work in an industry want to think my role, my job, my field isn't important. Of course, if you work in there and you're not a total jerk, you want to think your role is important. You should. This is good. But the problem is, as Chris points out, we're just not aligning as closely with some of the other really important business factors. And again, to Tyler's point, those align with market share, revenue, new products, new customers, customer stickiness, more brand awareness. There are metrics you can tie to a lot of those things and say, hey, if we launch a new product and 2 people adopt it, over the course of 2 years, that was a massive fail. If we launch a new product and 200,000 people adopt it, yay. We don't have good metrics in cybersecurity that align with business growth goals. And we haven't seen substantially enough yet that cybersecurity and even breaches and compromises affect the business in the negative way that launching a new product and failing to sell it does.
Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that. It's I'm constantly saying to security folks that we need to figure out, what products produce value, the products that we buy within security, but as you say, it's also true for security itself. How do you measure value? How do you prove to the business that you have value to them? Oftentimes in my career, I remember one day walking into my first big gig was at a payment processor, a large payment processor owned by U.S. Bank. And I remember walking into work one day and just thinking, like 2/3 of these folks could just never show up for work again. We'd be fine. Like there in every group, you would see these kind of hero roles that get things done and get everything done. And then, some people who get some work done. And then, at least like half of each of these departments seem to be people who just, never seem to be doing work. They always seem to be getting coffee or chatting or at lunch or.
The
And,
8 hour
it
lunch
occurs to
break.
me in general, I think businesses don't really, and I think this move, this argument of come back to work in an office or work from home is part of this. Is we don't know how to measure the value of an employee, the productivity of an employee, much less infosec within an organization. So I think it's an even bigger problem than just that.
Yeah, it's tough to attach metrics to. I mean, without getting political, because I don't want to get political. Like the first assassination attempt on Trump, they immediately doubled, tripled, quadrupled his security afterward, right? And it was one of
Mhm.
those situations where you didn't know the risk until the risk hit you, right? And then the risk hit you, and it's like funnel a bunch of money in, and
Yeah.
eventually that'll fade out,
Does
right?
adding
It'll
more
fade out
people
over
fix
time.
that problem? I don't know.
Well,
See,
without deep diving the political storyline here,
right.
it's just meant to
But
be
that's
an
your point,
analogy
right?
of,
Like
yeah,
it's kind of a knee
it's
jerk solution. Yeah.
yeah. So okay, we got attacked, something happened, dump another $100 million onto the budget, buy a bunch of tools, hire a bunch of people. Fast forward 4 years, 5 years, 6 years, whatever that is, lay off 60%. We're not
Yeah.
seeing attacks. We're not seeing the reality of what we're spending all this money for. So trim it all back 80%, right? So
Yeah.
it's when you can't measure, you're being asked to measure a negative, right?
Right.
What measure something that didn't happen. It's very difficult to do. And so because of that, it becomes very difficult to quantify your spend, to quantify your usefulness to the business, right? There's no positive direction that you can measure.
But then
I
I'd push back
remember
on that and
years
say, why
ago,
do we do all these simulations then? Pen tests are simulations of attacks, phishing, simulations. Like we do all these simulations of attacks. If for nothing else, like that is supposed to measure that value, right? And I know that it doesn't, and that's a whole conversation we can have on why it fails to measure it. But I do think it's measurable.
I think it is. I just think it's difficult. And I think most people don't measure it well. And it's a difficult kind of situation to have in play, right? I think it's doable, right? I'm not trying to say that this is an impossible task, but when we're
Mhm.
talking about, the original question at hand, just kind of that view of what's reality and how important we are to the business. If you can't measure it, you'll never know. And so I think we need to get better at it. We need to as a group push measurements into place where they can be useful, and find ways to prove efficacy to the business. Now, it's gotten easier when we can quantify records and cost of records and potential for loss and things like that, right? As we wrap numbers around it. The advent of insurance to that puts actuary tables around, the value of risk. But these are things that are still gray. I don't think as a field we are excellent at putting real metrics around it.
Mm.
I think the real crux of this article for me was the section around misaligned incentives. And Chris talks about um, that the business isn't incentivized to substantively improve cybersecurity over things like revenue, market
Mhm.
share, brand
And
awareness, right?
you see it all the time, right? Like
Yeah.
you literally see people say cybersecurity is the most important thing to businesses, which is just patently false.
Completely
Um,
wrong.
I was going to say a few years ago, I watched Laura Ketzel at RSA give a talk on how you can use cybersecurity and risk as a business differentiator. And I thought, oh, that's great. That's wonderful. It's never materialized. And the reason is consumers don't care. Now, it's a little different in the B2C world than it is in the B2B world. You will see companies
Mhm.
wanting to look at other businesses' cybersecurity policies, but a lot of the time it's a checkbox process. It's
Mm.
not really do I want to see or really do I care. It's something that we have to do for the auditors. It's something we have to do so it gets through procurement. It's something we have to do to justify funding. This vendor says they're secure. It says they've done their due diligence. It says they have these controls in place and they align with NIST, CIS, blah, 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 name your regulation. And so it definitely is part of procurement processes for companies, but it's not taken as seriously as looking for other ways to meet customer demand. Very, very few products in this world at a business level can say, our customers really, really care about security.
Yeah, and it's tough because it's one of those things that's not important at sales time in a lot of cases, but it's important later, right? Like how many of us knew how CrowdStrike rolled out new code to endpoints before it caused the largest IT outage ever? Like all of us know way more about that than we did before it happened. And trust, relationships, B2B and B2C, trust is really important, and security is can be a way that you build that trust, but oftentimes the trust is implicit and it doesn't become important until something happens. So looking at like Uber's reputation a couple of years back, a lot of people bled off the platform and went over to Lyft, and it took them a while to build that trust back, and it took changing out a bunch of executives and stuff, but none of that was really cybersecurity, a job for them to do as much. Ends up going back to executives, and then their priorities and stuff like that. Even when it is something that could be perceived as security and compliance and things like that, like it's not the CISO making that change. It's the CEO making a public statement.
The problem with the field of cybersecurity is if you're a business and look, if there was zero probability you would get hacked, you obviously wouldn't buy anything, right? You wouldn't put any security in place if there was zero probability you could get hacked. And the problem is you never know what the probability of getting attacked for you is. And if you don't know what that probability is, it's impossible to determine how much security to put into play.
Yeah, how
It's
much to buy?
just a guessing game. And so as a business owner, if I could get away with putting in zero cyber, I would. If I was confident I would never get attacked and 100% sure that that could not happen to me for whatever reason, I wouldn't buy it. Nobody would. And so it's
Yeah.
just a measurement of probability against risk. That's all cyber really is. And it has nothing to do with making the business better.
And
Yeah.
honestly, even with CrowdStrike, that was big. Businesses were down. Air travel basically ground to a halt for some companies for hours, for some for days, right? So there are productivity losses and other implications. So that is measurable. But I feel like
That's a
even
negative though. You're not even providing a positive to the business. That's a negative to the business.
right, hold on, I'm not done. I'm not done. I just haven't had enough caffeine. I'm not moving fast enough. But the thing is, I even feel like even though that was a few weeks in the rearview mirror, so many people have basically forgotten about it and moved on. Yes, the deltas of the world are still pounding their fists and stomping their feet and going, "We lost revenue. We want Microsoft and CrowdStrike to pay." But businesses, I was traveling on Tuesday. I can assure you that air travel is not down because of this. I can assure you that people are going to continue to fly. People's memories are very, very short, even when a cybersecurity quote crisis
Yeah.
happens. I shop at Target, I shop at Home Depot. I'm still pissed Home Depot refuses to take Apple or Google Pay, but I will still shop there. And yes, they had a massive breach, a while back. Don't care.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I'm
And
in
it's
security.
yeah, and I think that's been widely proven at this point. We know it doesn't kill businesses. We know the impacts are tend to be temporary. But yeah, where do we fit in at that point? If we're not number one, where do we fall on that list? And I think we've got we don't have there's not a lot of training, there's not a lot of experience that you gain that teaches you how to demonstrate value. I think that's still a very uh, young role, young skill at this point, a developing skill, for security leaders, figuring out how to position security as something that can help. And part of it is, we keep having failures, so we keep saying, if we only spend a little bit more here, it'll be different in the future, and it's just not. And I think there's a lot of factors for that, and I think one of them is a lack of transparency. There's not a whole lot of details about how companies fail when they do fail. Those details are considered embarrassing and kept private. And so, what do we have to learn from? Like you got to make that data public if you want the industry to learn from it and get better. Because to Tyler's point, a lot of it is pretty basic, like don't leave passwords around in plain text files. I guarantee you almost every company with more than 2,000 employees right now has passwords in a text file somewhere. But you don't see a big project to go gather them up and get rid of them, because sometimes they need to be there. That's how the application gets its credentials to log into a database, is a jdbc.properties file that has credentials in plain text. And if you look at how the breaches happen, that's not the reason the breach happens, but it certainly makes the attacker's job a lot easier when they stumble upon a text file with logins for 100 databases throughout the organization. So there's all these just little things that we could learn from these breaches that don't require proving a negative, that we can do to improve. How many employees have moved roles from one part of the business to another and kept their old access privileges? That's another thing. Too many privileges leads to a lot of stuff. So a lot of it's just governance. It's just basic hardening and things like that, that we're just not doing, that makes it so much easier for attackers once they get in.
Well,
But
Adrian, you
yeah, yeah.
just expertly, once again, segued to another article,
Oh,
Beyond
did I?
Immature
Good.
Rhetoric. Beyond Immature Rhetoric, it's on Security Week, an article by Joshua Goldfarb talking about how people talk about breaches. And it's one thing that the industry needs to grow up on, for sure. I mean, we can all be armchair quarterbacks. We can all look at other people's jobs, other people's companies, other people's configurations, other people's policies, and point a finger at them. Um, but it doesn't help. And when we see that in the industry, it's not helping anybody. Very much to your point, Adrian, especially when it comes to sharing details about a breach. If you know you're going to be mocked, if you know there's going to be ambulance chasing, if you expose, if you open the kimono, so to speak, why would you
Well,
do that? Most companies
lawsuits
aren't
as
going to
well.
do it. Yeah.
Yeah, some of it goes directly to revenue, right? Like you don't want to invite a class action lawsuit.
You don't want to do a lot of things, but security teams are not going to share as much. We're not going to have as much industry cooperation if people are indeed expecting to be mocked. Now, I don't know that that's the case for everybody, and this article doesn't specifically talk about that, but it does talk about the case against mockery, and it's a huge thing. It's a huge problem. I am not on X anymore, but when I was, you could literally drown hours of your day if there was a breach,
Oh
watching
yeah,
people
the
dump all
memes,
over
yeah,
a
just
company.
trashing. Yeah, yeah,
And it's
these
like, why
idiots.
don't you go do your
She
job?
has a music degree. No wonder they got hacked. You know,
Exactly.
remember
I,
that one?
I,
Yeah,
I do. I took that very, very personally.
yeah, yeah. Right. Like all of us are musicians on this podcast right now. Yeah, that's yeah, and just so irrelevant. You know, particularly with the skills we're talking about that are lacking at the security leadership level. You know, recognizing business value and stuff like that. You know, a cybersecurity master's degree isn't going to give you that. Not
I
today.
can make a huge case for music as a prerequisite to cybersecurity in terms of analyzation and pattern matching.
That'd be a good
Like,
talk. We should
just
make that a
give
talk.
me an hour, I can talk about why a music degree is really good for that. But
RSA
once
still
again,
open. CFP's
oh,
open.
oh, is it?
Submit it.
um, but the reality is, if we do have this mockery in the industry, we're not going to have people who are cooperative, and we're not going to be taken as seriously. I'm on other social media platforms, and quite frankly, recently I've muted a lot of people who just go on there to
Mm-hmm.
bitch about security stuff. I'm like, I don't care. Like, Tyler, your wife posts the cutest pictures of your kids, and I'm like, this is awesome. This is great. That's what I want to see. Adrian, when you were in Brazil, loved it. Do I want to hear about somebody complaining about their job on social media? No, I do not. I do not.
Yeah.
And I sure as hell don't want to hear somebody trashing another company, because you know what you're doing? You're putting that big spotlight on yourself and saying, come hack me. I'm an idiot.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's I know CISOs with ambulance chaser lists, and they refuse to do business with those, and they share those lists with other people, and it's really distasteful. It's seen as distasteful in the industry to, you know, right after something bad happens to one company, you know, to same day, next day, send out, you know, offer your services as an alternative.
We're
And I
offering
think
two
it's just a
weeks
general
free to anybody who thinks they're affected.
I think it's a general lack of empathy that kind of goes along with social media, right? You know, that relative anonymity that you have and lack of repercussions, you know, just leads to people, you know, just being mean.
Yeah,
Yeah.
move along.
So thank you for transitioning us from between all those essays there. You know, we've got a few other items I want to grab here before we wrap up. Number 5, we don't need to talk about that much. I listened to yesterday's Paul Security Weekly, and they covered this pretty extensively. But basically, this was like a subdomain takeover. Was basically what happened here is the .mobi TLD moved on, you know, and started using different URLs for management of it. But a lot of the tools still use the old URL. So basically, they were able to leave traps for those tools. You know, some of those tools have RCE vulnerabilities in them, remote code execution. So yeah, it's kind of like when you hear about somebody take over, uh, you know, an old domain of a company, or like a fat finger, a common mistyping of a email domain or something like that. And all of a sudden they've got 200,000 emails, you know, .mil emails and stuff like that. Same thing happened here, basically. But good coverage of that over on Paul's Security Weekly. And then Aaron Costello, who got a job at App Omni for spotting a big issue with Salesforce has had some kind of website capability where you could build a website, and there was like an implicit guest access that was added by default that people didn't know to turn off. So very much an open S3 bucket type of case here, and he basically found the same issue with ServiceNow. So Aaron is very good at spotting that stuff, which is why he got a job at App Omni as a security researcher. So cool to see him spotting that stuff, hunting it down, and bringing it to people's attention. And then the Fortinet one here, this is a breach that was it was one of those. It was like, okay, like you maybe got in somebody's it was like an open Google Drive share or something like that, got access to some sales spreadsheets or something like that. Like didn't amount to much, but the attacker calling themselves FortiBitch, which is funny if you know Fortinet because all their products are Forta something. Very entertaining, but one of those where the attacker's trying to make a big deal out of almost nothing and trying to get some money for it, trying to get a ransom for it. No, I don't think they're going to be successful there. Number 8, this is, let me see if this links to the podcast. So Dark Reading covered this when it was live, and this is like a revisiting after 5 years. Where 2 physical pen testers were arrested in Iowa, breaking into a courthouse, which they were hired to do by the courthouse, by the state. But the local sheriff said, this isn't the state's jurisdiction. Arrested the pen testers. So these physical pen testers have felony arrests. And this is 5 years after the fact. Great interview with the I said the CISO of Coalfire in the notes here, but it was the CEO of Coalfire. I'll fix that. The 2 pen testers who were arrested and the journalist at Dark Reading that covered them. It's a I don't want to say it was a great chat because it's kind of depressing because 5 years later, on a daily basis, they're still dealing with this. One of them had to start his own firm because nobody will hire him with a felony arrest on his record. So he fails every background check. So just an absolute nightmare just because there was a sheriff on a power trip, basically. And
I
imagine
wouldn't.
chilling
Back in my
effect.
pen testing, oh, it's completely chilling. Kelly Jackson Higgins was the journalist that did this story both 5 years ago and now. But back in my pen testing days in the early 2000s, I refused it. I actually
Oh,
refused
yeah.
anything physical. I wouldn't do them mostly because I was afraid. I was chicken little, not because I was worried about like getting arrested or anything. I just would never felt comfortable like actually physically breaking into a place.
Hmm.
I don't know. I just was always afraid that some overzealous security guard with a gun or a taser would get me, right? And had nothing to do with the get out of jail free card problem because I just assumed we always had it, which I'm sure these guys assumed they had a correct get out of jail free as well. So that was never the reason I turned it down. I turned it
Yeah.
down just because I was scared. I didn't want somebody pulling a gun on me by mistake.
Turns out that get out of jail free card isn't currency accepted by everyone. Which was the
Yep.
case here. Like they had all the proper documentation on them, handed off to the sheriff. He said, "I don't care."
Yep.
He said,
That's kind of a jerk sheriff too, but that's a whole other story.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the state of Iowa is very apologetic about it, but still, their records haven't been expunged. They still have felony arrests on their permanent records, and it's still a big pain in their ass. So
sounds like we need a federal and state governmental pardon to occur for these gentlemen.
Right. And this.
It's so depressing, right? Like people can't see past. If I were a hiring manager, no, I'm not currently, so I don't have to deal with HR and all that. But if you can't see past something like this and you've got somebody with really good skills and you can't figure out a way to make that happen, that's really, really sad because you've literally got 2 people who are just doing their jobs. So
yeah, and
the hiring process is also broken.
Yeah. It's go check it out. It's I was going to say more about it, but you should just listen to the full podcast there. It's there's a lot of details there that are worth listening to if your company does a physical pen test, or if you're doing them personally or considering doing them. You got to listen to that. So our squirrel story and our final story today is is interesting to me because I think we have the same problem in infosec. Where I've worked with several data scientists over the years that don't pay close enough attention to the value of the or the quality of the input data that they're using, and they go way deep with that data, not realizing that it's either partial trash, complete trash, garbage in, garbage out is kind of the lesson here. And I actually have a physical prop here.
Oh boy, where's this going,
So
folks?
the this story is about the guy that's behind. I don't know if he's the one that originally came up with the concept of blue zones, of these places on Earth, all over the world, where it's common for people to live past the age of 100. So he's got several books he's published on this. He had a Netflix series on this, all about these blue zones where these people live longer than everywhere else. So the idea is, wow, like what do they do different from the rest of us? Why do they live longer? So it turns out the data is just really bad. These are places where deaths are not well tracked. They might intentionally not be reported because there's a lot of pension fraud because somebody keeps collecting pension checks for someone who's died. Or, it's just a really rural place where they don't, so there are these towns or these parts of countries. Okinawa is one that's used as an example here. And he compares the data with Japan's own internal data on nutrition and health that says Okinawa is like almost dead last, like the worst nutrition, biggest drinkers. And one of the big points that this book makes is that all these places have little to no alcohol use. But then you hear Japan say, that Okinawa is one of the biggest, they're some of the heaviest drinkers. Something ain't right there. So yeah, I bring that up because I think we have similar problems in infosec. You'll see people make an entire career out of data that's no good. So not our typical squirrel story, not all that lighthearted, but I think it's
not at
it's a
all
good
lighthearted.
lesson.
Thanks, Adrian.
Well, if you actually read it, he's really funny. It is
Okay.
really entertaining.
It's really
I
funny.
didn't
All
do
the
it justice.
Okinawans are raging alcoholics. Dun dun dun.
There goes my plan. I had planned
But
to move to Okinawa
and the
within the next
percentages are
couple of years.
crazy, right? Like it's not like half the data is bad. It's 82% of the people aged over 100 in Japan turned out to be dead. Like that's how bad the documentation is. 82%. And it's
There
similar
goes my
in some of
plan.
these other blue zones.
I guess I just got to stay here and die early.
Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like you can live old anywhere. I think is a lesson from this. That these diets aren't that special. Those places aren't that special, as somebody wants you to believe that they are. So, maybe don't move to Sardinia or Okinawa just because you want to live longer. I think is the lesson here.
It's so sad. I
That's
really
fair.
want to believe that drinking mushroom coffee and eating fat fragmentation chocolate is going to make me live forever. I saw that today. There's something like fat fragmentation chocolate.
So I want to be careful not to throw out the baby with the bathwater here. Like just because the data was bad doesn't mean that some of his conclusions weren't correct, right? Like maybe
Oh,
he
no, I
is
know.
onto
I'm just
something
saying
with the
I
different.
want
Yeah,
these claims to be correct. I want to eat the fat fragmentation chocolate and live forever and be skinny and healthy.
we
There
just
was
need to now reevaluate these things, taking the bad data out of the equation.
You know what
That's
they
all.
say in this article, though, that we could probably end on here is what is the best guess about true human longevity? And he says longevity is very likely tied to wealth.
Yeah.
Richer people will live longer because they do lots of exercise, have lower stress, eat fairly healthy compared to less well off folks. So I think that's the trick. Just get rich and then life's way easier
Get
and you
rich
live
or
a lot
die
longer
trying.
too.
Get
I'm
rich or
Exactly.
die
snapping
If you're
trying.
my
going to go for it, go
fingers.
for it.
Where is the money? It's not coming.
All right. That's a clip right there. Thanks so much, Katie and Tyler, for joining me today.
Thank
And
you.
Pleasure as always.
Yeah, next week I'll try again at a shorter news segment. Didn't work out this week, but I had a lot of fun.
Me too.
All right, big thanks to everyone watching or listening to this week's episode of Enterprise Security Weekly. Next week, we'll be talking to Seth Goldhammer, coolest name ever, from Graylog about the shakeup in the SIM market. And Jason Shockey will help us go deeper and understand even more about the cybersecurity job market and the different paths you can take within cybersecurity. See you then.